Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday. It's a big lottery playing day, February 2nd, 2022, or 2222, if you know how to pronounce it correctly. We get doubles, of course, this year, as we'll have a 22222, but 2222 is a lot more fun, I think. Plus, it's Groundhog Day, and, of course, the temptation to do the Groundhog Day opening, or talk about it being Miami Beach, or not being Miami Beach, or play today's tape tomorrow is overwhelming, but we'll power past it because, of course, the former guy is a big criminal, and we need to focus on things like that, plus, worldwide pandemic, etc., etc. Plenty to pay attention to as it is. The morning tweet from Bill already made it through. Of course, it comes at about this time each day. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is the big day. If Kagro X's Farberware coffee percolator, oh boy, sees its shadow, we get 6 more weeks of Sanka. Gosh. Whatever happened to Sanka? They don't still make that, do they? I've never seen it on the shelves. I feel like I've asked that question before, though, at some point. Anyway, I do have a coffee percolator. I have 2 coffee percolators, as a matter of fact. One that I had that, I don't know, somehow was slightly malfunctioning, but not enough for me to bring myself to throw it out. But I got another one, and then I thought, what if the day comes when I need to run 2 coffee percolators at once? Even though I also have 2 drip coffee makers. And I don't even drink coffee all that often, quite honestly. I don't have to, I don't make it first thing in the morning. I like to have it first thing in the morning, but I'm doing a radio show, and I can't have the coffee going at the same time. I go with tea, mostly because there are no bathroom breaks, really, during the show. Occasional, in case of emergency, but coffee is something that doesn't work out all that well in the morning. So anyway, I have the 2 percolators, and I mean, for somebody who is patient enough to wait for a cup of coffee until 11, you'd think I would have fewer coffee-making implements. What do I have? What is mine? Huntington Beach coffee percolator or something like that. I don't know. I'll just go look up the maker just so I have it. It's not Farberware, unfortunately. I can't imagine. All right, I can't make that claim. But yeah, we have 2 coffee percolators and one tiny little, almost hotel-sized drip coffee maker, and then a full-size one. And those are all there because, what if we have people over? Or during Thanksgiving, when we have lots of people for dinner, and I have to make regular coffee and decaf. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll have to check it out. Yeah, Greg was asking, is Hamilton Beach, is that were you guessing at what the maker of my percolator was? Because I think that's what it is. Or did I say it and you were like, what the hell is that? Is that even a brand? I don't know. We'll have the production staff check on the make and model of my percolator at some point. Or maybe I can check during the break, during which I would normally be running to go to the bathroom or something like that. Okay. So, yeah, Greg, you were okay. So, anyway, I said Huntington? Oh, okay, yeah, maybe I left off the beach. Okay, well, that's the one, I think, that we've got. This is important news, everybody. Be quiet. I'm getting to it. I don't know what my make of the 2 drip coffee makers are, but anyway, like I said, for somebody who's got a very little demand for coffee, and now I don't even use either of them, Greg's like, all right, what the hell's going on here? I better call in and restore some order. But, yeah, all right. Anyway, good morning, Greg. What kind of coffee makers do you have in your house, and how many?
Good morning. So we generally use drip, and
good.
We have one, and it's a Melita style. And, of course, the other thing is, okay. Of course, very important is how you ground your beans.
Yeah, right, if you're into it.
So I have a couple of different grinders. I actually have 2 different coffee grinders, one for regular and one for decaf, so they don't get mixed up.
That's good.
So that we're not up at 4 a.m. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because, I'm old. And so in this household, we were talking about coffee and percolators this morning.
See?
And remembering back in the day when I was a kid, there were only percolators. which
Yes.
made awful coffee because it
I
burned
don't
it.
Is
But,
that what
the
happens?
brands were
Yeah.
chock full of nuts and
the coffee
A&P
brands.
5 o'clock coffee
Oh, yes, right.
and
There's an
Savarin.
8 o'clock one.
Savarin was the
Savarin.
big one in my house.
Is that a
Came in a can.
regular?
You know.
Okay. Not the decaf fake coffee like
No,
Sanka.
so the Sanka, I suppose, was for that. I don't know. Or I can't remember what Sanka was, whether it was
think that
decaf
was-
or Insta coffee
I
or
think it
whatever.
was
But
decaf instant coffee.
it's those brands are long gone in terms of what
Yeah.
people use. And if you're going to make coffee, do a drip or a French press because it just tastes better.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I got the percolator, and it does eventually burn the coffee, but if you just drink it all at once, it seemed like it was okay to me.
Right.
But
Well,
it is
if you
kinda
pour it on your
inconvenient.
head, it works, and it doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm awake now.
I'm awake. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, you can stop.
When I was down in Costa Rica, they had some interesting. They had their drip coffee makers. They just have little sort of like, I don't know what, maybe like cheesecloth bag essentially,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and it just hangs over the pot, and you just So there's no mechanism. You don't have filters, and the bag
Like a coffee
is the filter.
bag, like a tea
Yeah.
bag.
So, but they were very much into it, and they're
And
into the
people
coffee.
have tried to
in
market
Costa
those
Rica.
here, but they never really caught on.
No, I thought about they're selling them all over the place in Costa Rica, and I thought about taking them home, and then I realized if they put them out in your room or your hotel room or whatever, somebody else has to clean up the grounds, I guess, out of the bag. I don't know.
Right.
So I didn't use them as I was like, what
Right.
happens
That's why
to the coffee?
drip them and toss them
Yeah.
method is popular.
Right. So I didn't want to make any problems for the housekeeping staff to clean up this coffee grounds, and I wasn't sure. And looking at the thing, I said, "This can't be right. I mean, just leave a mess here? That's wrong."
Right. Anyway, so I was just listening to your show as
yeah.
I often do, and
That's what
I
happens
just thought
when
to
people
myself,
listen to the show.
Huntington Beach really it's a place. It's not a brand. So
Okay.
maybe I meant Hamilton Beach.
Yes, that must be it. Did I say okay? All right. Yeah, that's the beach I want. Yeah, Howard Beach.
Howard Beach. No, none of those. None of those.
No, Long Beach.
So here's what's going on today. Omicron
Beach.
is declining around the world,
Yes, it is.
but still presents
good.
danger. So there's still a problem until it gets a little bit better. It's so weird because Americans are so binary.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad or it's not there. Well, what about if it's declining and it's 9/10 of what it was, which was awful, and it's not back to baseline yet? Well, then we can forget about it, declare it's over, and then go about our business.
Well, it's too bad no one's measuring the numbers.
Yeah, it's too bad. The hospitals are easing up. There is a very, very interesting strain, if you will, of discussion, particularly centered around Denmark, where the Omicron BA2, so-called stealth variant, is very prevalent, and they're spiking and easing up.
Okay.
And the
Good.
advisors to
Good.
the Danish government who are defending the practice are saying, look, here's the deal. Yeah, it's around, but our ICU and hospitals are really in very good shape. And in the end, that's what people care about. So the public is saying, okay, we don't want to go super duper tight. We want to protect the hospitals. And as long as the hospitals are okay, we'll accept the risk. And that's a countrywide decision that people are making the way people vote with their feet.
Okay.
Did you motivate them? Well, we'll see. If they show up, we motivated them.
All right.
So it's where discussion is sort of going in the U.S. The problem is that when you look at both what people are doing and the actual data about what people want, it's a little bit complicated. I will throw into that mix, by the way, and I'll dig up that Monmouth poll that was just out that talks about this a little bit. But there was an announcement by the feds that 6 months to 5-year-old vaccines are likely to be approved by the end of February, which is really a great thing.
That's almost now.
Which
the end of this month.
Well, what's going to
And it's a short
happen is
month.
I think mid-February, the usual committees of the usual people will get together. And this time it's sort of a little backward.
Yeah.
Usually what happens is you have the companies, banging on the door of the FDA and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices that advises the CDC.
Yeah.
to say, we have this product, you should approve it. And in fact, this time around, the FDA invited Pfizer and BioNTech to submit their data.
Oh.
And the company said, yeah, but our data shows that 2 shots doesn't work quite as well as 3, but we're not quite done with our 3rd set of data.
All right.
And the FDA said, do it anyway. Submit it anyway, because if it turns out, as we all suspect, that just like for everybody else, 3 are better than 2, then at least we can get started on the 2 now, and then you can get your data for the 3rd later. And then parents will say, well, why didn't we start earlier if we knew this was going to happen?
Yeah, yeah.
So let's start earlier. And if people don't want to take it, they don't have to take it. There's no mandate for it. But if people want it,
that's true.
then they can have it, and they can start early. And that's, the best way to manage this very difficult, muddy situation where it's unclear what the data actually is going to show in the end. And Pfizer said, okay, sure, that's what you want, that's what we'll do. So
Sounds
that's what's happening. It's really rather interesting. So Monmouth did a poll that they released yesterday. Time to accept COVID and move on, they wrote.
Oh, because they're pollsters.
But yes, but the poll said some very, very interesting things along the line there. Okay. Americans are still very concerned about the virus. They're just not so sure about federal measures. Okay. Faith in the ability of Biden and the federal government to get a handle on the pandemic continues to fade amid persistent opposition from nearly 1 in 5 Americans about getting vaccinated. So, it's always unclear what these polls are measuring. Are you measuring Biden's ability to get the unvaccinated vaccinated? Well, he's going to fail because they don't want to. They're going to dig their heels in. They're going to be children about it.
True.
Is that Biden's fault? Well, the question is, can he get it done?
Could be persuasive, no. or the Green Lantern.
Yeah, exactly. Fully 7 in 10 Americans agree with the sentiment that it's time we accept COVID is here to stay and we just need to get on with our lives. Of course, they don't define what that means. Yeah, right. Including 78% of those who report having gotten it already and 65% of those they've not been infected. But the main difference is due to partisanship. 89% of Republicans, 71% of independents, 47% of Democrats. And only a third of the public feels the country will get the outbreak under control and return to normal by the end of the year. So they're saying it's time to have the pandemic over, but we fully recognize that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's time to say the pandemic is over and spread
it's
the pandemic.
It's time to want the pandemic to be over.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's common ground there. Everybody thinks that.
Oh, yeah.
Will it actually be over? Well, only 2/3 think so. Okay. Only 1/3 think. 1/3 think so. 34% feels the country will get the outbreak under control, and the other contingent says probably not. In fact, more than 1 in 4
feels normal.
Believe a return to normalcy will never happen.
Okay, well that could be too. But again, what is normalcy? I'm going everywhere they say I should normally go. It's just some of those places I wear a mask.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah,
it's not going to be a situation where you can go anywhere and not even think about it and never wear a mask.
Okay, well that's all right. But I mean, it was always the case that you couldn't go everywhere and never think about personal safety.
But here's when you drill down a little bit and say, well, what are people really concerned about? Half the public is either very or somewhat, 23 or 27%, concerned about catching one of the new variants. And the concern includes 58% of those who have not had it and 38% of those who already have. Mm-hmm. So the numbers who are very concerned about it is up somewhat from December because of Omicron.
Yeah.
The number of people who are concerned about a family member becoming seriously ill has increased since December from 30 to 38, but it's still lower than September. Okay. But a stable proportion of the public remains opposed to vaccination. Half of American adults report getting a booster, 45%, and we're not much better in Connecticut. We're only 50, and that sucks, and we really have to do a better job. A significant number, 37%, remain unlikely to ever do so, include 17% who remain opposed even to getting the initial vaccination. So opposition to vaccinations, only 17%. That's not a big number. If we got everybody else, we'd be in much better shape than we are right now.
Yeah, we'd be a little worse off than Denmark, where they're making different decisions.
The pollster says, and he's very clear about it, Patrick Murray's very clear about it, he says a key factor in the public's inclination to accept having to live with COVID is the intransigence of a sizable segment of the population on vaccination. It seems unlikely
Birthers.
herd immunity could ever be achieved through preventative measures. What the public is saying, we recognize that we got a bunch of jerks who will never get vaccinated, so we got to learn to live with that. That's what they're saying.
That's what we have to live with. Jerks. That's true.
And it is true.
Yeah.
So that part I think the public gets right.
Okay.
Interesting at the same time.
Well, there you go.
The Monmouth University poll also finds over half of Americans, 52%, support instituting or reinstituting face mask and social distancing guidelines in their home state. So we think the pandemic really ought to be over, but if it's not and you have to do stuff to help keep it under control, okay, fine.
Yeah, well, that's good. By the way, how did Monmouth University conduct this poll when it's totally closed because of COVID?
I think they have access to
must be open.
Either percolators or telephones.
Yeah, I guess so.
And
they're there.
tape decks.
Everybody,
Tape decks, they have tape decks too.
Oh, well.
And 4 tracks. They could do all this stuff. They can mix.
Okay, true. They can take care of all
So
those
some
things.
of them
All
are
the schools are
landlines
open.
and some of them are cell phones.
Right, they're open. I don't know what people are complaining about. If they're at this point, if your school is closed, it's because there's too many sick people actually sick. There's no preventative closures going on anymore.
Right. Less than half the public, 43%, support requiring people to show proof of vaccination in order to work in an office or other setting where they're around other people. Oh. And that support for the approach has declined steadily since September. It's 43% now. In September, it was 53%. That makes total sense because everybody understands that even if you're vaccinated, you could still get Omicron.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the idea of forcing people to show their vaccination as somehow proof that you don't have the virus doesn't work the way it used to.
No.
So Joe Rogan style would be, well, but everybody knew this is something you're supposed to do 8 months ago, and now you're saying you don't have to do. Well, because it's different.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's true.
And the public gets
Things
that.
change.
Well, I'll make a big deal of it to show that the authorities don't know what they're talking about. Actually, what it shows is that they're adjusting to new circumstances.
You cannot have that. That's the big danger. I just did read an article about what Denmark was up to in the way of that it seems counterintuitive, the things that they're doing, loosening some of the various guidelines, restrictions, etc., given that they're suffering this enormous wave. But one of the key elements of the article was public trust in the public health authorities and compliance with the orders is much, much, much higher in Denmark than it is here, and it's just generally felt that, hey, if things turn bad and we need to turn the restrictions back on, people will do it and comply, and we'll see results quickly because that's the way we are in Denmark. Not
yeah, I mean,
necessarily
firstly,
the case here
that
in the United
they
States.
will, and secondly, that they'll do it.
Yeah. So, they feel much more comfortable loosening up because they think that if things get bad and it warrants tightening restrictions, Danes will do it because they're great, I guess.
So I have this really great thread by a fellow named Nirav Shah, who lists himself as Maine, state of Maine,
all right,
CDC, Center for Disease Control. So I guess he's a statewide official here.
Okay.
And he has a nice little thread here on the day of the blizzard. Remember the blizzard?
Yes.
Wasn't that
There's
long
another
ago?
one coming.
We got an ice storm coming, but it's not going to be a blizzard.
Well, I mean, I'm going to the ice cream store for a blizzard.
Yeah, well,
okay.
Put on your ice cleats. So he says, well, I spent last night
blizzard?
continuing my research into the Blizzard 2022 hoax.
Oh, doing his own research, is he? Okay.
He said, thankfully, Twitter and Facebook have helpful algorithms that pointed me in the direction of real experts who helped me round out my thinking. I studied poignant analytical memes from leading thinkers in finance, technology, and art sales. My surprise, the insights actually confirmed all my preconceived notions about this storm. Thank you for the research help, Twitter. It's led me to conclude that the hype around the blizzard is being driven by the weather industrial complex. In short, it's all propaganda, and I'm concerned for our republic.
Okay.
Well, CDC.gov says blizzards are no big deal so long as you're financially stable, don't have to leave your house, have food, can afford heating and internet, and don't have to worry about power outages. And that applies to me, so why should I care about anybody else?
Okay. Yeah, right. No hope for the others.
This morning, my neighbor said I needed to put salt on our shared sidewalk to keep them safe. That's inconvenient. Why should I be inconvenienced to help them?
Right. Freedom.
And people who are vulnerable to slips and falls just stay inside?
True.
And get this. My town implemented a parking ban. They say it's to help to keep the roads cleared, but it really amounts to the government telling me, a taxpayer, what I can and I can't do with my private property.
Yeah.
Didn't we fight a war over that?
Probably. We're going to. Yeah. Right. Okay. I see the parallels here.
Right? And those so-called meteorologists, they have no clue what they're talking about. Like earlier in the week, they said 10 to 20 inches, and now it's 8 to 12. Do they know what they're talking about? Come on.
They never have.
I challenge them to debate me on this. and I also find it deeply suspicious. Their models change all the time. I thought it was science, which doesn't change, like gravity.
True. Also, although that changed. But anyway.
Who pressured them to change the models? Come on. Follow the money.
All right.
Now, we also need to be talking about the impact of Blizzard 2022 on our kids. Right? If it weren't for the alarmism of big meteorology, our kids would be outside playing today. But instead, there's a blizzard and they're inside. And that is unacceptable. I say, let them play.
Yes. And no scarves. I need to see those smiles.
That's right. They're telling people to wear gloves. Do you know what the long-time side effects of gloves are? How do we know gloves won't cause skin infections or vitamin D deficiency? We need randomized trials, and we need them now. And besides, gloves don't work. They've never worked. The experts say good gloves help prevent frostbite. That's nonsense. I know a guy who got frostbite even though he was wearing gloves. Checkmate. There, I got you.
This could all be true.
Right? Plus, I did the research, and frostbite only happens about 1% of the time. It's brilliant. I mean, this is like Swift stuff.
It's got everything.
Swiftian.
All right.
Right?
They have
and
unisex
besides, I did
gloves
the research,
now.
and frostbite only happens 1% of the time. And I got a buddy who had it, and he was fine after his ER visit and skin graft.
All right.
Right? And besides,
all on target.
Some people might die from the cold. But how many died from the cold, and how many died with a cold? I ask you.
Right.
Right? And how many of those died have pre-existing conditions? Why don't they tell us? There's no transparency. And this wear gloves things, I've had it. Telling me I won't get service in a store unless I'm wearing a shirt or shoes. We need to stop living in fear, sheeple. So here's how I see it. I don't need gloves. Treatments for frostbite are good. I'll be fine. I went out for a drive this morning, and the entire town is on lockdown. Completely ridiculous overreaction. This will melt away. It'll be gone by Easter.
Yeah, when the warm weather will come, you'll see it'll disappear.
Right. What about all those people who said wore gloves back in July? Now they're changing their mind. It's July, and they're telling us not to. They don't know what they're talking about. So, pretty brilliant. But I think he put his finger on what's going on. This is Joe Rogan style.
Yeah. Right. Oh, I hope he used hand sanitizer after he put his finger there.
Yeah. So, that's the whole thing. What I mean is Rogan doesn't go and rant like this. He just has people on because he wants a reasonable conversation with them.
Yes, right. So I found in my research that's true, especially that part.
Right.
I love
and
that.
And somebody else, we did a Joe
hats.
Rogan show on Monday about all of that.
Yes.
One of the things I thought was so interesting are people coming and say, people want to be on his show because he is a very good interviewer, but they also know they could say whatever they want. He's not going to press them. So they're very comfortable. And that's what makes it such a good interview, which was a really interesting insight.
Okay.
They're not worried. They're not going to be challenged.
I guess that's what some people would call a bad interview. But it's good for the guest.
A softball interview. But it makes for good guests.
Yes. Or it makes the guests comfortable. And there are people who won't come on your show who would be a big score for a show like that who won't go if they feel like they'll get tough questions. So right. I don't know why it's such a score if they don't get tough questions, but it is. Yeah, people love listening to interviews, even when people don't reveal anything. I don't know what it is, but okay. And then I think in the last day or so he was back in the news-ish because I guess he saw a preliminary discussion of a study that suggested that ivermectin might work at some level, and he said, "Oh, look here, I got so much trouble for talking about ivermectin being effective," and then they rescinded the or issued a new interpretation of the results of their preliminary study, and ended up basically saying, no, that thing we said about ivermectin and
not in people. It wasn't in
working
people.
With
it was in rats.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah.
And essentially they said, look, we never said that it worked against COVID-19 as a cure for COVID-19 or even as a preventative, but it does it did exhibit in these animals some limited antiviral properties. Didn't do so well necessarily with the virus we're all talking about, but some viruses died because they were smeared with this stuff. And so looky here, everybody should eat horse paste again. I guess not. And then it was withdrawn quickly. And then everybody, then he deleted his tweet after it had gotten shared 20,000 times. And people said, well, see, okay, he's reasonable. He deleted the tweet. This is all you can do. But maybe he should have been on top of it. Then people pointing out, the study had been, they'd issued that caveat hours before he tweeted it. But you know how it is. It arrives on people's desks before they see the...
Well, you got to do the research,
I guess so.
And
he's
what's this
to
about them changing their mind about what they said?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Science.
First you tweeted that ivermectin worked, then you deleted it. Why should we be listening to you? I guess by your standards.
Well, in this particular case, yeah.
I mean, yes,
Why should
definitely. I really shouldn't.
I agree with him. See, you got
Okay.
it right this time. So, as a setup
All right.
for after the break,
Yes.
which is about to come up,
That's
do
right.
you know who Jimmy Savile is?
Jimmy who? I guess not.
Jimmy Savile.
Not
An English media personality,
Right.
died in 2011. During his lifetime, was well known in the UK for his eccentricities, generally respected for his charitable work, knighted in 1990.
Nice,
In late 2012, a year after his death, reports surfaced he had sexually abused hundreds of people throughout his life.
So, all right.
All right, keep that name in mind because we're going to talk about him just in passing
Okay.
when we talk about Boris Johnson.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that'll be interesting.
Well, Johnson brought it up.
Oh, well, they're weird over there. But, yeah, this could happen. Like, I imagine that we could have eventually found out that, say, Sir Bill Cosby maybe had a past we weren't proud of.
Johnson's deflecting attention by accusing someone else of being easy on him.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll find out who after this.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What were we talking about? Yes, something happening in England and a bad guy who got found out later on.
A fellow named
we
Jimmy
were bad.
Savile, who turned out to be something of a pedophile.
Okay.
And is a rather famous figure in merry old England.
Well,
So it turns out that everybody was waiting for this report on whether or not Partygate was a big deal for Boris Johnson. And
yes.
it turns out, yes, the
Okay,
report came
it
out,
is.
and yes, it was.
huh, okay.
And Scotland Yard, in fact, is investigating. And
well.
it was only a preliminary report because Scotland Yard's investigations mean, just like with January 6th in our Department of Justice, you can't reveal everything in the middle of a criminal case because some of it is sealed to protect the integrity of the case for the
okay.
prosecutors.
All right.
So they couldn't tell us everything that Boris Johnson did.
Just hints
And
darkly.
at first he said, well, preliminary is all you're going to get, just like the Bill Barr version of the Mueller report. And everybody, including his own conservatives, demanded that the full report be released when available, and so he had to agree to that.
Okay.
And here's a summary from a very opinionated opinion columnist in The Guardian
Parties.
named Marina. Is that how you pronounce it? Marina Hyde?
Marinara sauce. Yeah.
Never mind wine fridges. The Tory party is drunk on Kool-Aid.
Oh. Oh, can you get that?
And the subheading is, yes, conservative MPs really are rallying around an MP who used a pedophile-based conspiracy theory as a fig leaf. That's why I brought up the name of Jimmy Savile.
Ah, okay. Not a good fig leaf pedophilia. All right, go on.
If you ever wondered what Jim Jones, remember Jim Jones? Jonestown?
Yes, right.
If you ever wondered what Jim Jones's corpse would have looked like if it had spent 3 weeks getting bleached and bloated by a Guyana river, it floated up to the House of Commons dispatch box yesterday at 3:30 p.m. That is not a very pretty picture to paint.
No.
Let's begin with some real talk. The Prime Minister is under police investigation for multiple breaches of his own COVID laws. At least 4 gatherings or parties in which Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, was very naughty.
Yes, he got
directly
COVID
involved,
too, right?
And is being probed by the Metropolitan Police, including one in his private flat.
Okay. When was it?
Police are investigating 12 potentially law-breaking Downing Street parties, which took place after the British people have been ordered by him, which is why that little girl was so outraged, to live under the most draconian restrictions imposed in peacetime.
Is that
The
right?
global Britain that Johnson promised saw him yesterday bin off a call to the Russian president, who is apparently on the brink of an invasion, so he could explain that he needs to wait for police officers to decide if he went to an illicit party in his own house. The Conservative MPs, somehow able to make their peace with all of this, increasingly resemble cult members accepting the latest transparent lies and failures of a cult leader. And suitcases full of Kool-Aid seem to have been wheeled into Boris Johnson's meeting with Tory MPs last night, and talks about how some of the people leading the rebellion said for now they'll leave it alone. MP Gary Sambrook was widely reported to be one of the leading lights, but right now he said, nope, this is the Boris Johnson we love and who's delivered.
Okay. Well,
But Johnson said to them, he's reported to have compared himself to Othello, who he seems to think was always seeing the best in people. Righto. To confirm, the country isn't just being run by a guy who can't understand the plot of Othello, but by a guy who can't understand the plot of Othello and is writing a book about Shakespeare.
Should be some book.
So, Gary, your MP who's supporting you, Gary, let me explain to you. It's called not giving an F.
Yeah.
Look it up.
I guess that's basically what an odd thing. And what an odd thing, too, that this comes to make such trouble for Johnson. This is, I guess, what they had hoped they would get here in the United States out of pictures of Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done without a mask at one point.
Right. She makes fun of him for always using things in the third person. We had a failure of leadership. We must look ourselves in the mirror. We must learn. Who's we? Let's face it, she writes. He's the least convincing man in the mirror since Michael Jackson. In fact, speaking of pedos, the Prime Minister chose to use one as a fig leaf, such a Churchill move. When the hour came for leadership, Johnson opted to knowingly advance a grotesque and indefensible conspiracist lie that Keir Starmer, who was the Labour leader and who excoriated the Prime Minister during his turn at the dispatch box, failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile when he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. I watched some of that, and I have to say, I don't know if it's real, because I didn't see that guy in the background going, order!
Oh.
And I missed it. It was like, okay, is this really happening? But I guess it was. So all conservatives who regard themselves as decent need to ask if it's really that much of a leap from this sort of thing to some of the other pedophile-based conspiracies that are increasingly part of the dangerous undertow of global populist policies. If they're not up to it, it'll continue. And that's part of the reason why I'm bringing this up.
Okay.
This, Pizzagate started here, but it's, really infecting the whole rest of the world.
Okay. Yeah, they're talking about us when they say the global conspiracy thing. There's a couple other places where it's taken root, I guess, but mostly following the lead of our Q weirdos.
So as things stand, insufficient numbers of Conservative MPs are prepared to wake up and smell the cordite. But all the Tories defending Johnson and skirting over these insults to ordinary people shouldn't feel alone. They have as their spiritual cousins all those craven Republicans who now refuse to condemn Donald Trump, despite the fact they know he's a liar and a crook, know he only cares about himself and thinks that rules are for little people, and know he regards them with a mixture of amusement and contempt. That's where the pardon dangling comes in, right? Mm-hmm. Backing Johnson in the face of all of this is not much different than scuttling down to Mar-a-Lago to pay obeisance and hoping you get smiled at. Come on, what's the worst that could happen? So that's the way they're looking at him from the lib side over in merry old England. And it's quite interesting, and we'll need to follow up, of course.
I guess so.
Even the New York
Get
Times.
ready if you're going to do it. Yeah.
Even the New York Times.
The liberal New York Times.
The liberal New York Times. The both sides of the New York Times. Shane Goldmacher has a Dan Ball-style news analysis today, not just stenography.
Okay.
Quite interesting. Trump's words and deeds reveal depths of his drive to retain power. Donald Trump said he wanted Mike Pence to overturn the election, dangled pardons for January 6 rioters, and called for protests against prosecutors. Now it turns out he had discussed having National Security Agency seize voting machines.
Yes.
This has stripped away any pretense, says the Times, says Shane Goldmacher, has stripped away any pretense that the events of January 6, 2021 were anything but the culmination of the former president's single-minded pursuit of retaining power. Mr. Trump said on Sunday, it's pretty straightforward verbiage here.
All right.
Mr. Trump said on Sunday that Mike Pence could have overturned the election, acknowledging for the first time that the aim of the pressure campaign had simply been to change the election's result, not to buy time. Not to root out supposed fraud. It was to change the election. And these efforts ended with a violent riot of Trump supporters demanding Mr. Pence block the Electoral College vote.
Indeed.
Right? Over the weekend, Trump dangled for the first time that he could issue pardons to anyone facing charges for participating in the January 6th attack, which is, of course, bullshit because he didn't do it when he had the chance.
Yeah, though I think he did dangle it.
The latest example of a years-long flirtation with political violence. And ignoring what happened the last time he encouraged a mass demonstration, Trump urged his supporters to gather in the biggest protest we've ever had if prosecutors in New York and Atlanta move against him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the events played out so publicly and so brutally and have since been so extensively re-examined that at times it can seem as if there's little more to be discovered. But then the New York Times reported that Trump himself had directed his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to ask the Department of Homeland Security whether it could legally seize voting machines in 3 key swing states.
Yes. He did.
And historians say the episodes in Trump's new comments acknowledging his determination to stay in power have newly underscored the fragility of the nation's democratic systems. Jeffrey Engel, director of the Center for Presidential History at Southern Methodist, said voters were understandably desensitized, if not numb, after a year in which Trump methodically sought to undermine faith in the electoral process. I actually think the American public is dramatically underplaying how significant and dangerous this is, because we can't process the basic truth of what we're learning, which is we've never had a president before who fundamentally placed his own personal interests above the nation's. Anybody who runs against Trump, that really has to be the tagline.
Yes, well, it's not very exciting.
Not that...
Come up with a better one.
Anything else. Basically, that's the thing that people actually care about.
Yes, this is not good.
Right? If you say, well, Trump is just trying to defend white people, well, that's going to increase his vote share.
Yeah, among white people, I guess.
Among white people, right? But if you say he cares about himself and not you, that matters.
Okay. Well, geez, I don't know. Do you think anybody would believe that Donald Trump doesn't care about them and really only cares about himself?
Well, that's one of the reasons why his vote percentage among Republicans is declining.
Yes, they want people to care about them.
They like that he says what they think, but they would rather somebody who says what they think and also cares about them.
You would think that would be a better combination if they could find such a person. And it shouldn't be too hard, considering that, when they say, well, he says what I think, I know what they think. They're thinking about themselves. So if you actually, you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. Say what they think and do things to help them. They're thinking, I wish somebody would help me. Get tax cuts, keep stuff, be able to pay to send my kids to private school, but do it for free because the government will give me money, that sort of thing. So,
again, the Times being the Times, it's been known for a long time, basically, to summarize here, that the people like Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn were advising Trump to use the military to seize the machines. And,
yes.
But new accounts suggest that Mr. Trump was more receptive to this than previously understood.
I guess so, except, he kept inviting them to the Oval Office to present those stupid plans to him. So it seems to me like we kind of knew, but they now have somebody else on the inside saying, yes, that is what was happening.
So the Republican response to this is, well, it was really bad it was bad, but in the end, the
somebody
right
else
thing
likes
was
a
done,
pedophile.
and the system bent but didn't break.
No, it broke.
Yeah, pretty much, it is broken, and he wants to do it again. And so that's why, moving on to the bulwark here with Tim Miller, he writes, "Ghost-faced Trump lives, and Susan Collins keeps letting him." The Good Republican, that's the name of her TV show. The Good Republican.
Yeah.
Won't rule out Trump 2024. And excoriates her for it. And that's all well and good. But the fact of the matter is the Republicans still are dancing around that. And so, yes, it is very important that the January 6th committee do what it does and does it in public and makes it clear to the public, in fact, here you had a guy who was trying to seize power for himself, did not care about you, and would do it again. And that's basically their task.
Okay.
And, that is not difficult messaging.
No, and, well, there seem to be some people dedicated to carrying that message. It's taking them a while to do it, although every once in a while when I get upset about it, I realize, okay, well, I don't want them to do it too early either, right? You don't want people to hear all this evidence and then
just like
forget
Republicans
about it.
are now worried they're peaking too soon for the election because,
Right.
New York State has just wiped out 4 seats for the Republicans, and maybe they don't have the lock they thought they had.
Yeah. Okay. Right. It's true. You want this stuff to hit at the right time. Maybe later is better.
What if the pandemic gets better? What if the economy improves?
That would be good. By itself, it would be fine. But also,
we're going to have a terrible report on Friday because of Omicron, but that doesn't mean much in terms of the overall big picture.
If the election were held Friday, I would care.
Exactly, but the election is not going to be held Friday, so we'll have to see what happens. Meanwhile, the Republicans are complaining.
Oh, no.
Because Joe Biden is going to appoint a Supreme Court justice who doesn't look like them.
That is true. He probably will. He told people what he was going to do, and then he's going to
find somebody
horrible.
Extremely qualified, and that person will be a black woman.
Yeah.
And Benjamin Dreyer writes, correct me if I have this wrong, but apparently there can be only one single solitary person in the entire United States qualified to ascend to the Supreme Court, and that person can't possibly be a black woman. Do I get the point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Soldad O'Brien writes, yes, sir. And if she is black, then it was his quota higher, and the next 85 justices can be white again.
Well, that's actually true, probably. So, yeah. I mean, all right, whatever. You have to be a certain kind of person to be upset that he's looking for somebody who could bring a different perspective and be qualified. That's, you have to be a part of the outrage machine.
Well, as far as the outrage machine goes, you really have to approach this from the point of view of how this is, being disseminated. All right. Mm-hmm. So you're talking to a bunch of people who are already primed to disagree with anything Biden does, but are waiting for the talking points. Once the talking points come, then everybody thinks this.
Yes. Well, they already think it now. They didn't even wait. The talking points came even before the nominee came. Just, we oppose this, and it's terrible for reasons from the 1980s.
Right. Well, it's terrible. We oppose it. Oh, why do we oppose it? Give me a day. Oh, the next day. We oppose it because it's terrible that Biden would single out somebody's race as a reason to appoint them.
Okay.
Right. Now, the fact that there's a Federalist conservative train ride to get to be a Supreme Court clerk, that's got nothing to do with it.
Right.
If you're trying to disrupt that by having somebody who might not agree to those things, that their clerk might not be from the Federalist train service that just drops them off, qualified or not. And that's how you get Brett Kavanaugh. But this new justice may not take that kind of person as a clerk. That's horrible. We can't have that happen.
Right.
We have to go back to the way we do it now.
There have to be 9 slots for those clerks. Yeah, interesting. I don't know. Don't know where they came up with the idea that they needed to be outraged at this. I mean, did people not remember? I know people have been bringing up the Reagan's promise to nominate a woman thing. But it's interesting. There's been very little discussion of how Clarence Thomas got to the
Susan Collins said, but you can't compare it to Reagan. Reagan said he would nominate a woman among many people.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not the same thing.
No, of course not. Don't know what that's supposed to even mean.
No, that's the point. It doesn't matter.
Among many people. Well, yeah.
I am making this point to the people who are already going to agree with me, so it doesn't matter what I say. It can be complete dribble.
I guess that's true.
The point is you have your talking point, and you can quote me.
All right. Well, there you go. And she's been quoted. I've seen it.
I think Soledad O'Brien had a better approach, so it had been drier.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so, too. I don't know. I'm not certain, but I am, yeah. I don't know. That's a confusing thing. I don't know why people, they just, when I look for a logical reason, it becomes confusing. The reason, that's the reason I shouldn't be looking for a logical reason, really.
Right.
I don't know. It confuses me, and whatever. We don't like the people who are doing this. The end.
All right. As a small break from the news, I'm just enjoying the sports news this morning.
Here are some sports news. Go ahead.
So yesterday, and this you have to appreciate that this is reported by NBC New York, local station.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Breaking: Tom Brady, who lost 2 Super Bowls to the Giants during his legendary 22-year NFL career, retires.
That's right. That's the most important point about him. That's how I remember him.
Yeah, you know.
Okay.
So somebody from New Orleans also pointed out that, well, the two times that Brady lost the series during the regular season were to the New Orleans Saints.
Oh, during the regular season, that's true too. Everyone has a claim to fame.
Right.
Right.
So
yeah,
if you're going to report on
against
Tom Brady retiring, it's important to, get the local important stuff in.
That's right.
I mean, the rest of it, everybody else will report. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. I don't know what they're going to do in Detroit, but whatever.
Well, he won a bunch of stuff,
only
but
a
the
couple
point
times,
is he lost to the Giants in the 2 Super Bowls.
Okay. Right. Well, that's my.
I don't even care about the
I
Giants, but I thought it was pretty funny.
Okay. There's other sports news. Today being 2/2/2/2 is the day that they announced the new name for the Washington Breadsticks. I don't know why they didn't stick with Breadsticks, but they have a new name after, is it 2 seasons playing as the Washington football team? Maybe more. Maybe 50. I don't know. I haven't been keeping track. But they have a new name, and they are the Washington Commanders, apparently. And I guess they have new uniforms, not commando. So that's good news for the players, I guess.
And what color are the uniforms?
The same ones, I think. So
what colors are they?
That would be burgundy and gold, I think they call them. It's
it's red and white.
Is it?
Well, it's burgundy and gold, huh?
Yeah.
So it's red and yellow?
Yeah.
So you're saying the Washington Commies are dressed in red and yellow right there in front of you where you could see it?
Yeah. Yes, I guess so. That's true. That's a good nickname for them, too. The short for commanders. Commies. I wonder if they thought about that. You did. That's good.
Well, I and like
opposed to
50,000 other people on Twitter, the first thing is, so the Washington Commies, pretty good.
Okay. I didn't give it any thought. So
I think they were better off as the WTF team.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit.
Or as my friends in Dallas say, doesn't matter. They're going to lose twice to us anyway.
Right. And that's
remember,
that's the way
all sports is local.
Yep. All right.
Just
so
like
I guess they have a big party. It's an opportunity. I was wondering why he was waiting. It's a huge opportunity to sell new merchandise, and I thought Dan Snyder would be, quicker off the blocks for that to make more money. But I don't know. He was waiting. Maybe, but if he had done it earlier, he could have sold face masks.
So the Washington Commies are dressed in Soviet colors. That's all I'm saying.
I guess so. Burgundy. I guess it's sort of stupid. They did use that quite a bit as a color scheme. So, all right. Well, they should put a little hammer on the uniforms on one side of the helmet and a sickle on the other.
Right. So to wrap all of this up, here's an interesting thing, and this is a look at political tolerance by generation.
All right.
From 1976 to 2021 and how things evolve. It's a big chart that I gave you.
No.
And they asked 3 questions.
Yes.
Consider a person who, A, admits he is a communist, and in a separate question, not the same person, who advocates doing away with elections and letting the military run the country, which is a very interesting question to ask right now. And another interesting question, who believes blacks are inferior.
Oh.
Okay? So, a white racist.
I'm struck dumb by this, yes?
By a authoritarian / fascist. or a communist.
Where could we find such a person? Yes, all right.
These sorts of people, not the same person.
Oh.
Should such a person be allowed to have a book in your library, speak in your community, or teach in a college?
Okay.
Right? Turns out, for every generation, silent, boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z.
Okay, I see that. Now that I understand the chart. Yes.
Yeah, they're fine with the commies.
Oh, well, all right.
But they have a big problem with people who believe that blacks are inferior. And if you go down and look at Gen Z, and they have the shortest timeline.
Yeah, there's hardly any graphs.
So it's easier to read.
Have gone from 1 to 2. All right.
The support for commies, having a book in your library, speaking in your community, or teaching in a college has gone way up.
Yeah.
During the time that they've been allowed to vote.
All right. Therefore,
but
having the
advocating doing away with elections and letting the military run the country has dropped tremendously. It was actually pretty high.
Was it?
They were okay with that.
Really?
And now they're not.
Well, I wonder what changed for them.
Yeah. So, from 60 to 40 on teaching in a college. And, most people are free speech advocates, so it was all right for any of those folks to speak in your community or have a book. But Gen Zers were the least receptive to that sort of thing. And of all the different categories, commie or authoritarian or white nationalist, blacks are inferior. Blacks are inferior, like nobody really wanted.
No one wanted them around?
Them around.
Okay, well, good. That makes good sense.
If you're a millennial or younger, shouldn't have a book in a library, shouldn't speak in your community, shouldn't teach in a college. If you're a silent generation, basically it's all right to do those things. But teach in a college, rather have a communist than an authoritarian or a racist.
Okay.
Which I thought was kind of interesting. I didn't expect those results.
You'll get fairer
Same is
grades
true for boomers.
from a communist.
Same is way true for Gen X.
I guess so.
Gen X says 70% of them say it's okay for a commie to teach in a college, but it's not okay for a racist. 33% say it's okay.
All right. They're just happy someone's
big
asking
difference,
questions.
whereas the numbers are much closer for silent and boomers. But boomers don't want them in a college either, right? It's not that far away from Gen X. 67% say it's okay for a communist, and not okay if you're a racist. 37%. So
communist is fairer.
In fact, nobody wants racists in the colleges.
Well, good.
Not even silence. They're not silent about that.
Yeah. Well, immediately afterwards. No. And silence.
And the thing that I found most interesting, of all the different groups who asked the question, would you consider a person who advocates doing away with elections and letting the military run the country? Is that okay to have them teach in a college? The lowest number supporting that of all the generations was the silence.
Okay.
They, fought the war.
I guess so.
Against that, and they were not real keen on it.
Yeah, I don't
Anyways,
know
that's my show for today.
So
But that's all I have.
Okay, I think that's.
But I'll see you tomorrow.
Sure, there'll be more.
Yeah. So you get to comment, you get to think about it, you get to have your own opinion, and I'll see you around.
All right. Well, I don't have an opinion. I am a silent generation.
Yeah, you're a silent.
I'm Gen X, but I run like a silent.
All right. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. And you got the time now to go out and get your Washington football team gear, which now becomes collector's item gear. Stuff that was only available for a few years. I wonder whether the prices go up on that stuff. You would ordinarily have a fire sale to get rid of all of that merchandise to make room for the new stuff. But knowing Dan Snyder, they're probably marking that stuff. They're probably printing new Washington football team T-shirts to sell as collector's items at the moment. But I guess they'll probably need the presses to run the new stuff pretty soon. So go out and get it. I ought to. I just realized there's probably a whole lot of stuff that you should hang on to that's indicative of this particular period in time, although a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and is unpopular now. But that's the way it is with collector's items. It's run-of-the-mill stuff that's not particularly popular now, but hold on to it after everyone has thrown it out, and you got something there. All right. So let's see. It's almost time for our break, so there's no point really into jumping anything in particular new and exciting. I'll just note for the record, I guess, something that looks like fun, but really, honestly, we probably shouldn't spend a great deal of time on. A new article in the Daily Beast by Kelly Weil, I guess, Weill, who's picked up on that crazy rumor thing that I told you about the other day, that the parents now around the country now picking up on it, now, even though it's been debunked as stupid, the urban legend that furries are taking over our schools and getting all sorts of special treatment, including everything from the very dumb thing that they said in Texas about lowering the cafeteria tables so that furries could eat out of dog bowls, to putting litter boxes in the bathrooms, to the new iteration of it, which is that not only are they putting litter boxes in the bathroom, but they are unisex litter boxes so that transgender furries can use them anywhere. And Amanda Marcotte, among others, pointing out this morning, all litter boxes are unisex. I don't think there's anything gendered about litter boxes these days, or ever. But there you have it. That's the headline. Furry panic is the latest dumb GOP attack on public schools. So there's that. You know how it is here in Virginia. Parents just want to have people who are idiots and fall for every hoax and urban legend to have a voice in your kids' education. That's how we should determine what gets taught in schools, what people heard about in their weird moral panic modes. More, I think, directly to the point, of course, we didn't make note yesterday or today. Did we have the opportunity to do it on Monday? I don't remember whether it happened on Monday or happened on Tuesday, but we should note a rash of bomb threats against historically black colleges and universities, all unfortunately, well, they're unfortunate whenever they happen, super unfortunate that it should coincide with, or maybe be caused by, the start of Black History Month. So, terrible situation to have there, but luckily so far nothing has turned up. But not very hard to draw the through line to the various attacks here in Virginia and around the country on critical race theory, and I'm sure that I wouldn't be terribly surprised to find out that that was somehow the motivation for it. And parents just want to have terrorists have a say in your kids' education. That's all. It's just simple. Listen to them. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, as tempted as I am to read through the story of the furry panic thing, just to let you know which states this is catching on in, I just don't know if it's worth the time. But I will point out that it's occurred in Pennsylvania's Central York School District. It's come up in Michigan. I think that's where the tape that we played the other day of the that one example of the loony lady, and there are plenty of them out there, speaking to her school board. It has been brought up, I guess, in recent months. It says here in the article, in Maine as well. So Pennsylvania, Maine, Michigan, and Iowa in recent months. There are even a few examples of it turning up in prior years in other states. The loony who thought that they were lowering the cafeteria tables was in Texas. So it's thanks to the internet. Thanks, internet. Spreading like wildfire, and, is awfully dumb. So I don't know. I just wanted to kind of point out that was still happening. It wasn't just a one-off thing. Speaking of audio and video that we have available to us, I just saw via Twitter Ron Filipkowski circulating video from Newsmax, which I guess is just, it's more right-wing weirdo porn, and maybe we shouldn't give any attention to it at all, but we do. What's the story, just in case you were worried about Trump trying to backtrack and distance himself from his prior dangling of pardons now that he knows that it could cause trouble for him? No, he's doubled down on it. Ron Filipkowski with the video here commenting, asked about Lindsey Graham saying that January 6th defendants should not be pardoned. How long is the tape here on the former guy here. We could let him speak for himself if it's a fairly quick thing. Well, it's a minute and 23 seconds. It might be a little bit long, but we'll give you the rundown of what Ron Filipkowski says he says, and then we'll play it because it's great to hear his voice in the morning. Trump says, I would absolutely give them a pardon. So there you go. I mean, I think that seals it, right? These people are being persecuted. Many of these people are not guilty. Lindsey Graham doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, which is always true, but it's good to see them fighting. Let's hear it. See if we can roll some of this.
And being treated like these people. These people are being treated horribly.
Oh,
I would absolutely, because some of them are being treated very unfairly. Yeah, I would absolutely give them a pardon
The
if
punishments
things
are
don't work out fairly.
Punishments are out of proportion to the crime.
Out of proportion, like 20 times out of proportion.
A lot of them
These
are in there
people
for
are being
a matter of
persecuted.
days.
And the other ones, when they caught people who killed people, and they want to give them the minimum sentence. They're out there fighting for a minimum sentence.
What about
No, it's a very
That's
unfair
fun, too.
situation. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and others, these radical left people. I mean, you have the vice president trying to bail everybody out of jail, but they weren't in jail very long. It was pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
And getting the bail was very easy. These people are in jail, in a horrible, disgusting, dirty jail, so bad that the court system, which is very left, is angry that people have to live like this.
There's no problem, of course, if you were holding people in cages, of course, at the border in filthy, disgusting conditions. You were supposed to do that. By the way, the president is, the former guy is in rare makeup form today with the pink puffy eyes and the orange skin tone, and you can tell that there's no makeup under the hairline here. But anyway, you get the idea of what he's talking about. But he's certainly doubling down and has plenty to say about the horrible, horrible conditions and how unfair it is for the poor people who bashed police officers over the head with fire extinguishers and smeared feces all over the walls in Congress. But he's able to get that out and say that on Newsmax and have a host nod along and say, yes, it's all very important. Okay, so we know where he stands. I'm glad that the traditional media, or what I called yesterday in the tweet, the social media release about the show yesterday, the snail mail media, now coming around to allowing themselves to say, yes, we do believe that Trump took an active role in the plots, the various aspects of the various plots to overthrow the government. Of course he did. He kept inviting them back into the Oval Office. Somebody was doing it. Yeah, there's an aide to blame. And that's great. I'm glad that somebody could face trouble for bringing those idiots into the Oval Office. But, I mean, it doesn't happen without Trump's assent. I mean, if they brought in people that he didn't want to hear from into the Oval Office for one of these strategy sessions, he'd say, get the hell out of here. I don't want to talk to you. Bring me somebody who knows what they're doing. It's not like he wasn't exercising the one, bit of veto power he understood. This he was doing yesterday. Maggie Haberman and others were talking about. I think we made mention of this on the air yesterday about it. Or maybe afterwards. I can't recall exactly when we did it on Twitter afterwards or during the show. But like I said, the snail mail media coming around to the idea that he was actually actively engaged in this stuff. And it seems like that, we knew this earlier, or at least we had the feeling, and now they have testimony, and it makes a big difference for newspapers who face the possibility of being sued for defamation, even though all the people who are going to sue them for defamation are going to catch COVID and prevent their trials from starting. You know how that goes. But yeah, they of course have to be a lot more careful about these things. So it's not entirely fair to blame them for not coming to these conclusions. They all meant for us to draw these conclusions from their reporting, I think. So we should give them some credit perhaps for that. But yeah, the idea that, he's actively engaged in this, not just a passive observer. There are very few instances in which Trump is an active participant in anything at all, and it's all similar stuff. And because there's so few examples of it, because, the role of the presidency is to have an active engagement in everything that's discussed with you and before you. but he was a terrible president and a lazy person in general. So it was quite obvious that when they were doing boring stuff like, what should national policy be on X, Y, or Z boring topic, he could care less. For that, he was a passive observer, and he would essentially let his advisors set the pace and say, declare this, Mr. President, and he would do it. But he was actively engaged on few enough things and dumb enough things that we should all have the hang of this by now. If it was about insulting people or making his enemies feel angry and upset, that he was actively engaged in. If it was taking revenge on somebody, he was actively engaged in it and directing things. If it was criming and stealing money, he was actively engaged in it. If it was criming by, in pre-presidential days, criming by sneaking into the dressing rooms of teen pageant contestants, that he was actively engaged in as well. And also, weirdly, as President of the United States, actively engaged in questions about decorating. That was a huge thing for him. What should the towels on Air Force One look like? What color drapes should we have? What about the carpet here? Those things. He's very into decorating, which is kind of a weird thing. But that all active engagement. Everything else, what should be the policy on oil drilling on public lands? What should we do about education? Blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I don't know. It doesn't interest me. So it seems to me that when you see something that he's actively engaged in, like criming to stay in power, it should be recognized earlier and celebrated. Not that we actually support his active engagement in these things, but the press should have a field day with it. Something he's actually actively engaged in. We now have some insight into what's going on in this guy's rotted brain. They should be talking about it and talking about it earlier. All right. Let's see. One of the things I wanted to catch up on yesterday, I wanted to return to the story that I read most of from out of Raw Story yesterday about the Florida state representative who won his, as they call it now, universal primary, and just the weird situation in which there were no other members of any other parties seeking this seat. So Florida, I wish I had the Florida provision in front of me that discusses how and why they allow this stuff to go ahead and ordinarily will declare someone the winner of the seat if they win that universal primary. It's not very universal. There's no other parties involved in it. But they had the opportunity. So you remember the story as we read about it in Raw Story. It was State Representative Darrell Campbell from, where was it? The Broward County area? I can't recall, but I know it mentioned in the story. Yes, 170,000 people, remember, in Broward County without any representation. Then there was an Orlando Sentinel story about it, and I do think when I checked yesterday whether I could read it in Pocket that it looked like it came up. So let me see if I can run through their version of it and see if there's any more detail that makes more sense of things. It's an odd situation, though. Republicans who control most of state government aren't prepared to let Broward's newly elected Democratic state representative, Darrell Campbell, take office during the current legislative session. And remember, this is something that not everybody is aware of. Each state legislature, state legislatures vary from state to state, from very much, part-time legislating to something more like full-time legislating like they have in Congress. But they're not constantly in session the way the Congress is. The Congress has 2-year terms in the House, of course, 6 in the Senate, but each Congress is said to last those 2 years. And for the most part, despite the fact that they take lots of breaks and district work periods and recesses, as they call them, they are legislating or potentially legislating right away from day one that they're sworn in all the way through the last day of the second year of the Congress, with breaks, as I mentioned. But we're used to that. Whereas in a lot of state legislatures, they have very intensive sessions. People have to leave home from whatever part of the state they're from. In some of these larger states, there's a tremendous amount of ground to be covered to make it to the state capitol and stay there so that they can get legislating done. And, there's a number of ways you could approach this. But a lot of legislatures, the pay is certainly part-time and the work is supposed to be part-time too. And so they do things like have a very intensive legislative session from, say, sometime in early January when they're sworn into their seats to, some states get it over with in a month. Some states get it over with in 2 months, or some work for a month and then take a break and then come back for another month and then wrap it up. And here in Florida, it looks like the session begins in early January when they swear everybody in and is pretty much over by mid-March. And the problem is that this guy has won his primary. There is no general election scheduled because a judge under the rules in Florida that they don't need it. But Laurel Lee, the Florida Secretary of State, simply insists that she cannot and will not issue the requisite certification to Campbell until after the date on which they would have had a general election, even though they are not going to have it. I mean, if you're not going to have it, why wait, is the real question. But that's the way it is. Florida Secretary of State Laurel Lee won't send a letter to the Florida House of Representatives declaring Campbell as the winner until at least March 8th. The annual 60-day legislative session, which began on January 11th, coincidentally the same day as that special primary, ends on March 11th. So she's only going to send the letter on March 8th. And who knows how she's going to send the letter. Is she going to walk the letter over there so that they'll get it on March 8th and let him sit from March 8th to March 11th? Or is she going to drop it in the mail so it might not even arrive until March 12th or later? If the letter from Lee goes to the Florida House immediately, Campbell would at best be able to cast votes only during the last few days of 2022's lawmaking. I remain hopeful. Am I surprised? I am not, Campbell said on Thursday. It's just unfortunate that our constituents now are being faced with a situation where their voice does not get heard. He was as they said, in Tallahassee to get acclimated, hoping he'd be sworn in next week when the full House of Representatives is set to meet. I guess that would be this week. Lee, whose office made the latest decision, is an appointee, of course, of Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. Campbell was elected in a primary to represent District 94 in the Florida House. Because only Democrats came forward to run for the position, the primary was open to all voters, called a universal primary. If there had been the need for a general election, it would have been held on March 8th. But the Secretary of State's office is sticking to March 8th for the letter, even though there won't be a general election for District 94 on March 8th. Lee's communications director, Mallory Morgan, laid out the timing on Thursday. As a courtesy, we will send a letter to the House and the Senate listing the winners of the elections, but not until after the general election, she said via email. Ultimately, it is up to the legislature to decide who has been elected and when to seat those members, Morgan said, referring questions to the legislature for further information. The Florida Constitution makes the House of Representatives the sole judge of the qualifications, elections, and returns of its members, like it does in the federal Constitution, which effectively puts the decision about when Campbell takes office in the hands of House Speaker Chris Sprowls, who I guess that means he could decide to accept newspaper accounts as sufficient and swear him in if he wanted to. I don't know how comfortable he'd feel about that, but anyway, Jenna Box-Sarkissian, communications director for Sprowls, didn't immediately have comment on Thursday about the Secretary of State's office's position. The Republican leadership position has been that it would seat Campbell when he was certified as a winner, but also that representatives don't get sworn in unless there is, or until there is, a certification letter. That was the position a previous Republican House Speaker took in 2019 when Democratic State Representative Dan Daly was picked to represent Northwest Broward in a special election. He wasn't sworn in until after the date that would have been the special general election, even though there wasn't a general election, because he he'd already been, it says represented, but I guess elected. Democrats, who are the minority party in the House, have been stymied at getting information out of DeSantis' Department of State. The Secretary of State has one job in this instance, and that's certifying the election. If anything, they've stopped all the parts from moving. They've completely put us on some sort of list of do not respond, said House Democratic leader Evan Jenny, who also represents part of Broward County. I can't get any answers, he said. Jenny, and I guess that's the pronunciation of Jenne, said he walked to the Secretary of State's office early Thursday afternoon and asked to speak to 4 different people. At 1:20 p.m., he said he was told that a staffer would come to see him in 20 minutes. After 5 p.m., no one had come to explain what the agency is doing. No one has called or showed up, Jenny said. They're not responding to anyone, neither myself as minority party leader or, more importantly, no one is responding to Representative-elect Campbell, and his ability to represent the 170,000 people in Broward County has been nullified. The 94th State House District includes Northwest Fort Lauderdale and parts of Wilton Manors, Oakland Park, Lauderhill, Lauderdale Lakes, and Plantation. Campbell received 40% of the vote in the 4-way special election, 11 points ahead of the second-place candidate. But, too bad. No seat for you. Let's see. Is there more about this? Yes, the uncertainty about when he'd take office stemmed from the nature of the special election. It was a primary to fill the vacancy created when former state representative Bobby Dubose resigned for what turned out to be an unsuccessful campaign for Congress. Dubose submitted his resignation in July, but DeSantis waited for months before setting a special election, acting only after a lawsuit was filed asking a judge to order him to set election dates. If the special election had been set earlier, as Democrats wanted, the seat could have been filled by the start of the legislative session. 2 other seats in the state Senate of Broward and the state House from Palm Beach County are vacant because the previous occupants also resigned to run for Congress. Democrats nominated candidates for those jobs, but because Republicans came forward to run, there are general elections for those positions on March 8th, the date picked by DeSantis. So I guess the argument at bottom could be, well, the Secretary of State could choose to recognize, I guess at the direction of the governor, that Campbell has been elected since they have one of those special universal primaries going on there. But why waste money issuing letters on January 11th and again on March 9th? Why waste all of that time and effort when you can just say, we'll do it all and take care of it all on March 8th or 9th? Not really much going on there, though, and certainly they could have taken care of business. But, the whole point here is Ron DeSantis using his authority as governor to essentially rig the system such that people who ought to be represented, i.e., in this case, mostly or many minority voters in these districts, but certainly a Democratic district, they're deprived of their vote in the state legislature with shenanigans. I guess things that I guess are within the governor's power, although not his original plan, which was just to never set a date for a special election. Again, something that we didn't really contemplate in the design of the law at the time it was written. Well, the governor shall have the power to name the date for the special election. Okay, that seemed like an okay thing to do because, of course, the governor will set a date for the special election. But what if it's in a district where only Democrats run and I'm a Republican and it says I shall pick a date? Okay, the date is 2050. Well, no, it has to be during, I don't know what. There's probably no restrictions. It's just one of those things that everybody said, well, of course they'll pick a date. And you could quibble with it being earlier or later, but eventually you'll pick a date. Well, they had to sue to make him pick a date, and then he just picked a date that said, you don't get represented in the next legislative term. Period. The end. Even though there was plenty of time to call an election early enough that even with a general election, if you had named the date earlier, Representative Campbell would be able to be seated. Maybe some other people wouldn't, but Campbell would. And so he picked a date that was designed to make sure he never got to sit. Kind of annoying, but one of many examples of things that we never contemplated happening in the design of the law. Similarly, I guess I got this message from Matthew Rigdon, who says, along with the I am not a lawyer warning, which is an acronym. And I realized yesterday, it turns out that there was some controversy with acronyms going on the internet. Maybe we'll just leave that one uncommented upon. But apparently some confusion, or I guess worry about other people's possible confusion when reporting the story about the bomb threats at the historically black colleges and universities, referring to them as HBCU, historically black colleges and universities. And apparently that's an acronym that's new to some people, not everybody, but I guess to some people. I didn't realize, though, that would engender any controversy. You go and look it up if you don't know. We deal in acronyms all the time, and sometimes you know them and sometimes you don't. The point, I think, if I recall correctly, was John Aravosis who was complaining about it and saying, why not just state the point more bluntly and say historically black colleges and universities? Because I guess he was, I think, maybe, to give him the benefit of the doubt here, in the back of his mind was just saying HBCUs were threatened with bomb threats. There's some section of the country that will read that and skim it and run right past it because I don't know what HBCU means, so that's not important to me, so I move on. I guess that's possible. And if all you're saying is on first mention, like if you're writing for the New York Times, you spell it out and then use the acronym and then everybody will know about the acronym from there going on, I guess that's fine. But if the complaint is using acronyms at all, I don't know what to tell you. Acronyms and abbreviations and shorthand, it's just the way we do things. And surely I've been confused enough over the addition of letters to the LGBTQ universe. And when they've added additional letters, I've had to stop and look it up. And it's just one of the things. For the curious in the world, it's a good thing. Anyway, Matthew Rigdon pointing out in his manner here that he's not a lawyer, which is IANAL, which is always eye-catching if you miss that first I. And what are you screaming about that for? In all capital letters. But I am not a lawyer, but, he says, reading the Presidential Records Act, which we complained about having no teeth yesterday in light of the new or the reiteration of news that Trump routinely destroyed presidential documents. I'm not a lawyer, but reading the Presidential Records Act, it doesn't seem there are any penalties except for using non-official electronic messaging in Section 2209, and he points to a recitation of the law on the National Archives page. And here it is, and pretty much, there's nothing in here that says what happens if you just don't comply. There's all sorts of things that you're supposed to do, and that the president and the staff shall preserve X, Y, and Z types of presidential records. But it doesn't say what happens if you don't, because when they were writing it, they said, well, of course, the president, we're ordering him to preserve it. But it's a little bit like that conservative person that I mentioned arguing with over the weekend about Virginia's executive orders. Well, if you defy an executive order, you are by definition, they said, they wouldn't show me where the definition was, but by definition, breaking the law. They insisted that there was some provision of law somewhere that gave executive orders the power of law. But using Republican realpolitik analysis here, if you can't get punished for it, is it really all that illegal? We may have the same problem here with the Presidential Records Act. If you tear up all the evidence of your crimes, whether before you are subpoenaed for that evidence or not, or knowing that you'll eventually be subpoenaed for that evidence or not, even suspecting that, what happens? And the answer is nothing. Apparently, some people try to tape the stuff back together, although I think I saw yesterday that some of the staffers at the White House that initially did spend their time taping these documents back together ended up getting fired for it. But yeah, the reason Trump continued doing it is there's nothing in the law that says anything in particular happens to him or anybody else if he continues to do it. Just one of the things you got to think about. And it's why Republicans are putting teeth in their laws, their anti-CRT laws, etc. There you can fine teachers $10,000. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As I've said, much to catch up on. A couple of smaller stories that have fallen through the cracks that we should catch up with and clear out of pocket, including, let's see, the news. I have in my hand the tweet from Sahil Kapoor back on January 28th. Remember, last month. In which he reported the news that the January 6th committee had subpoenaed, I don't think we actually discussed this yet, subpoenaed 14 people who participated as so-called alternate electors, right? That's the terminology they're using, for Donald Trump in the states that he lost. So a list via the January 6th committee is included in his tweet. The select committee subpoenaed individuals listed as chairperson and secretary of each group of alternate electors. I guess that's the language they use for it. Criminals is another one, I guess. But, you got to wait for the trial to happen. So there's names here of the chairperson and secretary who I guess would have signed and, if not notarized, at least attested to the purported validity of these documents. I don't think that they differentiated between states that hedged by saying we are furnishing this document as a just-in-case sort of measure. We believe that there'll be a challenge to the outcome of the election in our state, and in the event that authorities agree with us and decide to discard the electoral votes for Joe Biden, we want there to be an alternative certificate available of electoral votes for Donald Trump, given its late date, so that there will be electoral votes for our state to count on January 6th. Now, that's problematic, I think, because it's perhaps the case. I don't know if I've read the Electoral Count Act closely enough lately to know offhand whether or not that's an available remedy for you. I mean, there's these safe harbor provisions, and essentially, I think that perhaps, I don't know what to tell you exactly, but I guess some of these states, they thought, if we cast alternative votes on, December 14th, when the Electoral College meets, that they might be able to sneak by in the safe harbor provisions, I suppose. Well, anyway, some states you might recall hedged, a few states hedged and said, well, we're only issuing this thing. We don't purport to be necessarily the duly designated electors for the state. But if it should come to pass upon some review of the results of the race in this state that Joe Biden ought not legally to have been declared the winner, and some competent authority declares as such, we want our votes to be counted on January 6th in the stead of those previously cast for Joe Biden. Other states, the majority of the states that sent these things on, engaged in no such niceties and simply declared themselves to be the legal electors. And, I don't know whether they actually believed that their slates of electors would be read into the record on January 6th, absent any other, the action of any other authorities or the intervention of authorities, or whether they thought sending it would cause confusion, or whether they thought that the instructions from Trump to Pence would be, given that there are two sets, we need to do something different. There was never any hope of these alternative slates of electors reaching Pence's hands, I don't think, unless there was some additional level of conspiracy whereby these things would be smuggled to him. But if he followed normal procedure and simply entered the House chamber without the certificates in his hands and relied on the clerks to hand him the correct certificates for him to hand to the tellers, unless one of the clerks was in on it, and even if they had been, not everybody remembers exactly who won which states, but I think it would be noticed, particularly by people from those states, if the vice president were to say, here are the certificates from the state of Arizona, and he hands them to the tellers, and he hands it to a Republican teller, and the Republican teller says that Trump won Arizona. People from Arizona in Congress would say, wait a minute, Democrats anyway, would say, no, he didn't. That's wrong. And there would be objections, and they would probably dispense with those objections. Presumably they would have done it fairly, but who knows? The hope on the Trump side is that they wouldn't have dispensed with those things fairly and would have at the very least said, if we can't get Pence to say, no, these Republican ones are the real electors, they could at least get Pence to say, well, who am I to say which slate is the real electors? And, of course, the answer is you're a person who's read the newspaper and knows that Joe Biden won Arizona, so you should take notice of that independently and just say this is the wrong certificate. Anyway, so people from all of the following 7 states were subpoenaed: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. 2 each. The chairperson and secretary of the purported electoral college, the fake electoral college, in each of those states. That's Nancy Cottle and Lorraine Pellegrino in Arizona, David Schaffer and Sean Still in Georgia, Kathy Burden and Myra Rodriguez in Michigan, Jewel Powdrell and Deborah Maestas in New Mexico, Michael McDonald, why did I agree to read these names? Michael McDonald and James DeGraffenreid. Okay, long last name. In Nevada, Bill Backenberg and Lisa Patton in Pennsylvania, Andrew Hitt and Kelly Rue, Rue in Wisconsin. All of these names are linked to what I don't know, but I guess all back to this photo. All right. But maybe in the original release they were linked to each of the individuals and who they were. So they're all pretty prominent Republicans, all now under subpoena by the January 6th committee. And that's good news. Sahil had other news on that front, I think, as well. From the Huff Post, we have, this is S.V. Date's piece. The 59 Republicans who joined electoral voter fraud scheme for Trump could face prison. That sounds like the right remedy for this. What seemed like political theater at the time actually violated state and federal fraud laws, according to current and former prosecutors. No charges filed as yet, of course, but I think that's still proper response to this. Dozens of local and state Republican leaders who showed their loyalty to Donald Trump by casting fake electoral votes for him a year ago may now face prison time in return for that devotion. Because as the House Select Committee investigating the U.S. Capitol riot on January 6th starts to look into the origins of the scheme to send, quote, alternate ballots to Congress from states narrowly won by Joe Biden, the 59 ersatz Trump electors who claimed to be, quote, duly elected and qualified, could face federal charges ranging from election fraud to mail fraud, in addition to a range of state-level charges, which wouldn't necessarily be pardonable by the president were Trump to return to the White House, but maybe wacky governors could do it. And in 2 of the states, the Democratic attorneys general are openly calling on the Department of Justice to act. I believe it is critical that the federal government fully investigates and prosecutes any unlawful actions in furtherance of any seditious conspiracy, said Josh Kaul, K-A-U-L, Attorney General of Wisconsin, where 10 Republicans filed papers claiming to be the state's electors, even though Biden narrowly won there. This is a crime, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel told reporters earlier last month, adding that calling the electors slate alternate did a disservice and that it should be called a false, counterfeit, or fake slate of electors. In her state, 16 Republican office holders and party officials filed paperwork claiming then-President Trump had won the state even though he had lost it by 154,000 votes. This is election fraud, and it's many other crimes as well, both, I believe, at the state and federal level. Deputy U.S. Attorney General Lisa Monaco on Tuesday, I guess of last week or earlier, confirmed to CNN that Justice Department prosecutors are looking at those, but would not comment further. Arizona, where 11 Republicans filed papers falsely claiming to be the state's electors. Georgia, which had 16, and Nevada, which had 6, account for the rest of the 59. Georgia Republican Party Chairman David Schaffer, though, said he and the other 15 Georgians who sent the electoral votes for Trump did so only to make sure Trump could continue pushing a lawsuit alleging vote fraud, which was also baseless, but okay. There's been no credible suggestion that there's anything wrong, he told HuffPost. We made it very clear what we were doing. We did it right out in the open. But Georgia's would-be GOP electors chose not to include language clarifying that they would actually only be the duly elected and qualified electors in the event that a court challenge or other proceeding reversed the outcome there, the approach taken by Trump slates in 2 other states. 5 New Mexico Trump supporters filed a certification, that enclosed in quotes there, that began, we the undersigned, on the understanding that it might later be determined that we are the duly elected and qualified electors. And 20 Republicans in Pennsylvania went even further to make clear that their paperwork was not valid unless the November 3rd election result was reversed in their state. We, the undersigned, on the understanding that if, as a result of the final non-appealable court order or other proceeding prescribed by law, we are ultimately recognized as being the duly elected and qualified electors, their paperwork began. But they got subpoenaed, the chair and secretaries were subpoenaed regardless, which I think is the right answer. And it would be interesting to question them about why did you include this language and where did that idea come from? And did anybody tell you to include it or did anybody tell you not to include it? That proviso was key to Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro's decision not to prosecute the 20, although who knows, even people who had fake electors in their state who didn't use those provisos, who say it's a crime, they still haven't prosecuted these people either. So I don't know whether that was the real reason that Josh Shapiro decided not to prosecute. There would have been another reason if they had not included that proviso, I think. These fake ballots included a conditional clause that they were only to be used in a court if a court overturned the results in Pennsylvania, which did not happen, he said in a statement. Though their rhetoric and policy were intentionally misleading and purposefully damaging to our democracy, based on our initial review, our office does not believe this meets the legal standards of forgery. According to Schaffer, it was Trump's lawyers in Georgia who told him and his group, this is the important part, that any changes to the language they had provided would endanger Trump's legal challenge in state court alleging fraud and other election irregularities. So at some level in some of the states, at any rate, Trump's lawyers there were telling the fake electors, don't put these hedges in there. That'll jeopardize our chances in court. We were told not to alter the form, which also means that they got a form, he said, but pointed to an accompanying statement on December 14th, 2020, the date of the Electoral College vote, that explained that the Trump GOP, or rather the GOP slate, was being sent to Congress and the National Archives only to, quote, preserve Trump's rights under Georgia law. Still, the decision not to include explanations along those lines in the actual documents the 5 GOP slates sent to Washington, D.C. may prove costly should federal prosecutors zero in on Schaffer and the 58 others. Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor, said the potential federal crimes include forgery, obstruction of an official proceeding, that's the one they've been using against the January 6th rioters in some cases, conspiracy to commit fraud, and because the material was sent to its recipients via the Postal Service, mail fraud. The more serious of the offenses carry prison terms as long as 20 years. I think that was what attaches to obstruction of an official proceeding. That's not an exhaustive list, he said, adding that the potential penalties could help prosecutors get some of those involved to provide information as to how the schemes came together and implicate those planners. They are far more likely to cooperate if the DOJ leverage them. These folks should all be charged yesterday. The source of the scheme, however, was clear even as it was unfolding. The Trump White House was pushing it openly, while outside advisor Steve Bannon was promoting it almost daily on his podcast. On the actual day of the Electoral College vote, top White House aide Stephen Miller laid it out in a Fox News appearance. As we speak, an alternative slate of electors in the contested states is going to vote, and we are going to send those results to Congress, Miller said. Miller hung up Wednesday when contacted by HuffPost about that statement. The White House's plan for those alternate slates nevertheless was made clear in a memo by lawyer John Eastman, who presented it to Trump himself in the Oval Office. Because some states had competing, quote-unquote, competing slates of electors, Vice President Mike Pence could simply not count either set and leave those states out of the total entirely. There are, at this point, 232 votes for Trump, 222 votes for Biden. Pence then gavels President Trump is reelected, Eastman wrote. That wouldn't really have been sufficient to do since it doesn't, but I guess they could have, if they eliminated those states from the count, declared that 232 was a majority of the votes cast. Or, as the backup, of course, have the roll call by states. Trump's tweets in that period suggest that he, too, was fully aware that of the alternative slate scheme, as he repeatedly urged Pence to abuse his authority as presiding officer during the certification ceremony. The vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors, he wrote falsely on January 5th. Many states want to decertify the mistake they made in certifying incorrect and even fraudulent numbers in a process not approved by their state legislatures, Trump wrote in an early morning message on Twitter on January 6th. Mike can send it back. All untrue. Just hours later, at his rally that preceded the violent assault on the Capitol, Trump several times repeated the false claim that Pence could, by himself, give Trump a second term. You all know how he did that. Instead of asking the designated tally keepers to count and make it, now this is an interesting part. I should have started here. Pence, when he began the roll call of the states, made clear that he also was aware of the scheme by modifying the script to purposefully ignore the fraudulent pro-Trump certifications. Not that he had them in hand or they would ever make their way to him, but he, even if they did, ruled it out. Instead of asking the designated tally keepers, the tellers in the House and from the House and Senate at the joint session, instead of asking them to count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states, as then Vice President Biden had instructed 4 years earlier, and everybody else does usually, Pence told them to, quote, announced the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which the parliamentarian has advised me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a return from that state that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors. Sort of a belt and suspenders process. The Electoral Count Act makes clear that only those electoral slates that do come attached to certificates from the proper authorities in those states are to be counted. So those are the only ones that are going to be in the room. But the fact, well, there's a lot of meaning in that. The fact that he went out of his way to say it makes clear that he was aware of the scheme and aware that it was improper. He could very easily have said the same thing that Biden said and still have gotten the same result, because it was very unlikely that those fake certificates were anywhere in the room, anywhere near the room, and just weren't going to be counted. Everything was going to go just fine. But the fact that he went out of his way to add language like that made it clear that he knew what was going on and knew that it was wrong. That's an important thing. Because only the true electors had such a certificate attached, that necessarily excluded the fraudulent Trump states. Because that day was quickly consumed with the violent mob assault on the Capitol intended to stop the election certification altogether, and was soon followed by Trump's impeachment for inciting it, the fact of the alternate slates faded from view until the January 6th committee investigating the attack began referencing it in documents, which prompted renewed media interest in the certificates themselves. When we had a minute to breathe, we said, "Oh yeah, it's pretty damn criminal," Kirshner said. Nessel, who referred her case to federal prosecutors 2 weeks ago because it would be easier for them to investigate what appears to be a multi-state conspiracy, said she does not relish the thought of going after the 16 Trump electors in Michigan, a group that includes state lawmakers and state party officers, but that she will if the Department of Justice does not. "If I have to prosecute, I will," she told reporters. It turns out that the biggest fraud seems to have been perpetrated by those who are claiming fraud in the first place. Ta-da! She added that treating fake certifications as no big deal would send exactly the wrong message. We can't have people say, "You know what, I can do whatever I want, because look what these 16 individuals did. They got away with it. Nothing happened to them," she said. "Maybe next time it will work." We can't have that. Well, we certainly hope not. But we're still waiting to see what will actually happen with all of this. So, okay, that very interesting. Other smaller bore stories that deserve at least some mention. Among the people who got COVID and died, that probably should have gotten COVID and died, and then did. We have this news from Brazil. Brazil's most prominent anti-vaxxer dies of something. Gosh, we don't know exactly what it is, but I have it here from the Joe My God blog, dated January 26th. The Guardian used as the source here in reporting that Olavo de Carvalho, the coronavirus desiring, yeah, that's probably true. The coronavirus denying and desiring mentor of Jair Bolsonaro and Brazil's radical right has died in the United States, by the way, with one of his children citing COVID-19 as the cause. Well, you know how it goes at the end. Family asks for prayers, etc., etc. He, after announcing the death of the 74-year-old polemicist, a towering figure in contemporary Brazilian politics who was adored and abhorred in equal measure by millions of followers and foes. So, an apt end, dying not only of COVID, but dying outside of the country, and more or less, well, he wasn't in exile, but he wasn't at home, and came to the greatest healthcare system in the world, and they just couldn't save him. What do you know? So that's an interesting note. They got their sort of rough justice in Brazil. He's pictured here, by the way, in a hospital bed wearing a black and gold-lettered "Make Brazil Great Again" hat. So, well, I guess they did. They took care of it. Probably not the way he was anticipating, but Brazil's a little bit greater now than it was while he was still alive. I guess we can put it that way. And Leave it to the Brazilians to be outraged by that if they want to be. This is other news I haven't seen much discussed, but Daily Beast had a story back on January 26th that I thought I might update you on. But, I guess it looks like, is this just a pop-up? Yeah, we can get that out of the way. Florida shock jock in Matt Gaetz's circle pleads guilty. They're closing in on him, I guess. It says here the feds are closing in on Representative Matt Gaetz for his alleged underage sex crimes, or sex crimes against underage victims, I guess is a better way of putting it. He may have also committed sex crimes while he was underage. We don't know. But they're closing in with yet another criminal case, this time against a key witness, his wingman's best friend. Jose Pagliari and Roger Solenberger teamed up on this report. We'll give you the basics. Big Joe Ellicott, a former Florida shock jock with potentially key information about the sex trafficking ring involving Representative Matt Gaetz, has pleaded guilty in federal court, the Daily Beast has learned. Ellicott is the longtime best friend of corrupt Florida tax official Joel Greenberg, remember him, who was Gaetz's wingman in the underage sex operation. According to several sources with direct knowledge of their relationship, last year, the Daily Beast revealed that Ellicott knew intimate details about the teenage girl who was paid for sex by the group and actually texted what essentially amounted to a confession that they were scrambling to try and cover up details about their sex with a 17-year-old from the feds. Ellicott was particularly legally exposed through his involvement with Greenberg, who ran the small Central Florida tax agency like a fiefdom, where he hired his friends for no-show jobs. That appears to be what took Ellicott down. In court documents last week, Ellicott was accused of fraud for agreeing to, quote, pay bribes and kickbacks to a public official and a separate drug crime, illegally selling the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder prescription medicine Adderall. Wheesh. On January 18th, Ellicott signed a plea agreement admitting to both crimes. According to prosecutors, Ellicott was the intermediary in the kickback arrangement, carrying a $6,000 cash bribe from an unnamed tax office contractor to a public official. That would be Greenberg. In exchange for the bribe, Greenberg and the contractor worked out a deal where the contractor inflated invoices for work with the tax office, pocketing the difference. Ellicott also copped to selling a single unnamed client more than $5,000 worth of Adderall over the course of 2 years. The client made the payments to Ellicott's company, Uncle Joe's Coins, and transferred money via check and Venmo, according to the agreement. One $95 Venmo payment was disguised as 2-hour full-body massage. I don't know if that was a great disguise. Joe Zwick, attorney for Ellicott, told the Daily Beast that his client has been cooperating in the sex trafficking case against Gaetz. The case is being handled by the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., and is separate from the local ongoing investigation into Greenberg and the tax office, which gave rise to the charges in Ellicott's case. This investigation has nothing to do with the sex scandal, but with the unprecedented things Greenberg was doing with the tax office. The big difference is that Joel Greenberg was elected to serve the people and Joe was not. And the fact that this was done by criminal information, not an indictment, is pretty telling of how the prosecutors view him in this case, Zwick said, pointing out that Ellicott was not arrested. Obviously, they value his continued cooperation, as he does as well. We are going to set off sentencing as long as we can and do everything we can to reduce his time. That's his job. He's supposed to do that. Zwick said a plea hearing had been set for February, and it's February now, so that should be fun. Ellicott's plea agreement requires him to cooperate with the government in other prosecutions, including possibly testimony before the grand jury and in court. In exchange, Ellicott will not be formally charged by the grand jury and has a shot at significantly reducing his sentence. He'll also enjoy immunity from any other federal offenses known to the U.S. Attorney's Office relating to the two crimes. That immunity could be sweeping. The congressman has repeatedly denied engaging in any sex crime and dismissed this federal investigation as a political prosecution. Offered a stupid comment here. After nearly a year of false rumors, not a shred of evidence has implicated Congressman Gaetz in wrongdoing. We remain focused on our work representing Floridians. However, it appears that the deal struck with the prosecutors in Ellicott's case, I would say, is, they're there's probably a shred of evidence there, or they wouldn't have given him that deal. In addition to sex trafficking, he's got drug charges pending against him. It seems to me like they'd probably come down on him pretty tough if they felt like they had a solid case, and the fact that he was charged, I guess, says that they do. So there's not a shred of evidence in public view, but that's not unusual. It's not the same thing as there not being a shred of evidence, though. But we're going to have to wait for those shreds of evidence to make their way into public view, and maybe we'll eventually be rid of Gates. We will see. All right, one more thing, I guess, that we can squeeze in while we still have time, just by way of explanation. The other, last week, we heard from Newt Gingrich after his appearance, I think, on the Sunday shows last week, saying that, of course, if Republicans were put back in charge in Congress, you would see members of the January 6th committee facing jail time, right? But everybody's going to end up in jail. And if you wondered, was there any special particular motivation behind Newt's making that statement? I mean, that's the sort of thing that he would make without provocation anyway. But as it turns out, Newt Gingrich's controversial weekend comment had some reasoning behind it. That is to say that it comes about 2 weeks after the panel subpoenaed his longtime former aide, who also co-authored a book with him, according to Bloomberg Insider, right? I think that's who reported that. Anyway, now you know, Business Insider, what motivated him to speak out.
From
Self-interest.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Okay, well, at any rate, I'll include the article. It was Ross Worthington is the name of the longtime papal aide who was subpoenaed there. So just if you want to add him to your rogues gallery of who's in trouble with the committee and who's not, you can go ahead and do that. For now, though, Justice Putnam takes it away after this with his roundup of news from around the country and around the world.